It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon at Westfield Supermarket when everything changed. The autumn sun streamed through the large glass windows as shoppers moved through the aisles, picking up groceries for their families. Children pulled at their parents' sleeves asking for candy. Elderly couples compared prices on their favorite brands. It was just another ordinary day in the small town of Millbrook. Colonel Rita Vasquez had just returned from an 8-month deployment overseas. After months of eating military food, she was excited to cook a real home meal for herself. Still, wearing her casual civilian clothes, a simple gray sweater and jeans, she pushed her cart through the produce section. Her short black hair was tied back in a ponytail, and she wore no makeup. She looked like any other person doing their weekly shopping. Rita picked up some fresh tomatoes, thinking about the pasta sauce she wanted to make. She smiled as she remembered her grandmother's recipe. After being away for so long, these simple moments felt precious. She had served her country for 20 years, rising through the ranks to become one of the few female colonels in her unit. But right now she wasn't thinking about her rank or her medals. She just wanted to buy groceries and go home. At the customer service desk, an elderly white woman named Mrs. Patterson was getting more and more upset. She had been waiting in line for 10 minutes to return a broken toaster, and her patience was running thin. When she saw Rita walking past with her cart, something triggered her suspicion. Maybe it was the way Rita moved with military precision, or maybe it was simply her own prejudices talking. Mrs. Patterson couldn't explain it, but she felt something was wrong. She walked up to the young cashier and whispered urgently, "That woman over there looks suspicious. She's been walking around for a while and she keeps looking around like she's planning something." The cashier, barely 18 years old and working his first job, didn't know what to do. He had never dealt with this kind of situation before. The store manager, Tom Henderson, was called over. He looked across the store and saw Rita examining some pasta boxes. She looked completely normal to him, but Mrs. Patterson was insistent. "I'm telling you, something's not right about her. You should call the police," she said, her voice getting louder. Other customers started to notice the commotion. Tom felt pressured. He didn't want to cause trouble for an innocent person, but he also didn't want to ignore a customer's concerns. After thinking for a moment, he made a decision he would later regret. He called the police station and reported a suspicious person at his store. He didn't mention that the person was just shopping normally. Officer Bradley Hoffman had been having a bad day. He'd been with the Millbrook Police Department for 15 years, and lately he felt like the job was getting harder. Crime rates were up, and he felt like people didn't respect police officers anymore. When the call came in about a suspicious person, he grabbed his keys and headed to the supermarket. Bradley had always thought of himself as a good cop, but he had some deep-seated beliefs that he never questioned. He had grown up in a family where certain things were said about certain people, and those ideas had stuck with him. He told himself he treated everyone fairly, but his actions often said otherwise. When Bradley arrived at the supermarket, he parked his patrol car right in front and walked inside. He looked around and immediately spotted Rita in the pasta aisle. She was reading the ingredients on a box of spaghetti, trying to decide between 2 different brands. To Bradley, something about her seemed off, though he couldn't explain exactly what. Rita noticed the police officer walking toward her and felt a small knot form in her stomach. In her 20 years of military service, she had dealt with many law enforcement officers, and most interactions had been professional and respectful, but something about this officer's expression made her nervous. His hand was resting on his belt, close to his weapon. "Ma'am, I need you to stop what you're doing," Bradley said in a stern voice. Rita looked up, confused. She was just shopping for pasta. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked politely, setting down the box she was holding. "We received a report about suspicious activity. I need to see some identification," Bradley replied. His voice was getting harder, and other shoppers started to notice what was happening. Rita reached slowly into her purse to get her wallet. She moved carefully, knowing that sudden movements around police officers could be misunderstood. "Here's my driver's license," Rita said, handing over her ID. Bradley looked at it quickly but didn't seem satisfied. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Rita blinked in surprise. "I'm shopping for groceries," she answered. I just got back from deployment and wanted to cook dinner. Bradley's expression didn't change. Deployment? What kind of deployment? Rita explained that she was an Army colonel, but Bradley seemed skeptical. He had already made up his mind about what kind of person he was dealing with, and her words weren't changing his opinion. The situation was getting more tense by the minute. Other customers stopped their shopping to watch what was happening. Some pulled out their phones to record. Children hid behind their parents, scared by the serious tone of the conversation. Rita tried to stay calm, using the training she had learned in the military. She kept her hands visible and spoke in a clear, respectful voice. "Officer, I can show you my military ID if that would help," she offered. But Bradley wasn't interested in seeing more identification. His prejudices had already painted a picture in his mind, and he wasn't going to let facts change it. "I think you need to come with me," Bradley said, reaching for his handcuffs. Rita felt her heart racing. She had commanded hundreds of soldiers, faced enemy fire, and served her country with honor. But right now, in a simple grocery store, she felt powerless and afraid. "Sir, I haven't done anything wrong," Rita said, her voice still steady despite her fear. "I'm just trying to buy groceries." But Bradley wasn't listening anymore. In his mind, he had already decided that Rita was a threat that needed to be controlled. The other shoppers watched in shock as the situation escalated. Mrs. Patterson, who had started the whole thing, began to realize that maybe she had made a mistake. The young cashier felt sick to his stomach. The store manager wished he had never made that phone call. What happened next would change many lives forever. It would lead to investigations, protests, and difficult conversations about race and justice in America. But in that moment, in aisle 7 of Westfield Supermarket, it was just one police officer and one Army colonel, and a misunderstanding that was about to spiral completely out of control. The security cameras mounted in the corners of the store recorded everything, capturing a moment that would soon be seen by millions of people across the country. What happened next in aisle 7 would be talked about for months. Officer Bradley Hoffman made a decision that shocked everyone watching. Despite Rita's calm behavior and cooperation, he suddenly drew his weapon and pointed it directly at her. The sound of his gun leaving its holster echoed through the store, like a thunderclap. "Get on the ground now," Bradley shouted, his voice filled with an anger that seemed to come from nowhere. Rita's military training kicked in immediately. She raised her hands high above her head and slowly lowered herself, to her knees, then onto her stomach. Her heart was pounding, but she forced herself to stay calm. The other shoppers couldn't believe what they were seeing. A middle-aged woman screamed and grabbed her young daughter, pulling her behind a display of canned soup. An elderly man with a walker moved as fast as he could toward the exit. Several people had their phones out, recording everything. The store that had been filled with normal conversation and the beep of cash registers was now completely silent, except for Bradley's heavy breathing. Tom Henderson, the store manager, came running from the front of the store when he heard the commotion. When he saw Rita on the floor with a gun pointed at her, he felt like he was going to be sick. This wasn't what he had expected when he made that phone call. He had just wanted someone to check on a customer complaint, not this nightmare. "Officer, what's happening here?" Tom asked, his voice shaking. Bradley didn't take his eyes off Rita. "This suspect was being uncooperative," he said. But everyone who had been watching knew that wasn't true. Rita had been nothing but polite and respectful the entire time. Rita pressed her cheek against the cold floor and tried to stay calm. She had been in war zones where bullets flew over her head, but somehow this felt worse. At least in combat, she knew who the enemy was and why she was fighting. Here, she was just trying to buy groceries, and she couldn't understand why this was happening to her. "I'm a United States Army colonel," Rita said clearly, her voice muffled by the floor. "My military ID is in my wallet. Please, just look at it." But Bradley wasn't interested in looking at anything. His mind was made up, and he kept his weapon trained on her. After what felt like hours but was really only a few minutes, backup officers arrived. When they walked into the store and saw the scene, they were confused. They saw a well-dressed woman lying face down on the floor, surrounded by scattered pasta boxes, with Bradley standing over her with his gun drawn. It didn't look like any crime scene they had ever responded to. Sergeant Lisa Chen was the first backup officer to speak. She had been Bradley's supervisor for 3 years and had always found him to be professional, if sometimes a bit too aggressive. "Bradley, what's the situation here?" she asked. "Suspect was acting suspicious and wouldn't comply with orders," Bradley replied, still not lowering his weapon. But Sergeant Chen could see that Rita was complying perfectly. She was lying still, her hands visible, not resisting in any way. "Sir, may I see your identification?" Sergeant Chen asked Rita gently. Rita carefully moved one hand to point toward her purse, which had fallen beside her. "My wallet is in there. I have both my driver's license and my military ID." When Sergeant Chen looked at Rita's military identification, her face went pale. She was looking at the ID of a decorated Army colonel with 20 years of service. She had served in the military herself before becoming a police officer, and she knew what those rank insignia meant. "Bradley, lower your weapon immediately," Sergeant Chen ordered. Bradley looked confused. "But Sergeant, she's—" "Lower your weapon now," she repeated, her voice firm and commanding. Reluctantly, Bradley holstered his gun. Sergeant Chen helped Rita to her feet and handed her back her identification. "Colonel, I sincerely apologize for this incident. Are you injured?" Rita brushed the dust off her clothes and checked herself. Physically, she was fine, but emotionally, she felt like she had been hit by a truck. By this time, videos of the incident were already being uploaded to social media. Jennifer Walsh, a young mother who had been shopping with her toddler, had recorded the entire confrontation on her phone. She posted it on her Facebook page with the caption, "This just happened at my local supermarket. A police officer drew his gun on a woman who was just buying groceries. This is not okay." The video spread like wildfire. Within an hour, it had been shared hundreds of times. Local news stations started calling the police department for comment. The hashtag #JusticeForRita began trending on Twitter, even though most people didn't even know Rita's name yet. Tom Henderson spent the rest of his shift in his office, reviewing the security camera footage over and over again. The cameras had captured everything from multiple angles. There was no way to deny what had happened or to claim that Rita had been threatening or uncooperative. She had done exactly what any reasonable person would do when approached by a police officer. Tom knew he had to do something. He copied the security footage onto a flash drive and called the police station. "I need to speak with whoever is in charge of Officer Hoffman," he told the dispatcher. "I have video footage of an incident that happened in my store today, and I think someone needs to see it." Rita drove home in a daze. Her hands were still shaking when she pulled into her driveway. She had planned to cook a nice dinner, but now she just wanted to sit down and try to process what had happened. She had spent 20 years serving her country, commanding respect from soldiers and officers alike. But in that grocery store, none of that had mattered. Her phone started ringing almost immediately. Her sister had seen the video online and was calling to check on her. Then her former commanding officer called. Then friends from her unit. Word was spreading through the military community that one of their own had been humiliated and threatened for no reason. Colonel James Rodriguez, Rita's mentor and friend, was furious when he saw the video. He had served with Rita in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he knew her character better than almost anyone. "This is unacceptable," he told his wife as they watched the video together. "Rita is one of the finest officers I've ever known, and she deserves better than this." Meanwhile, at the police station, Bradley was telling his side of the story to anyone who would listen. "She was acting suspicious," he insisted. "You can't be too careful these days. I was just doing my job." But even his fellow officers were starting to question his version of events, especially after they saw the security footage. The police department's phone lines were lighting up with calls from angry citizens who had seen the video online. The mayor's office was getting calls too. Local veterans organizations were demanding answers. The incident that had started in a quiet grocery store was quickly becoming a major controversy that would affect the entire town. Rita sat in her living room, still wearing the same gray sweater she had worn to the store. She hadn't eaten anything since breakfast, but she had no appetite. She kept thinking about the fear in the other shopper's eyes and the cold feeling of the floor against her cheek. She wondered if she would ever feel safe going to the grocery store again. As the sun set over Millbrook, the video of Rita's humiliation had been viewed by thousands of people. The incident was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The phone in Captain Robert Miller's office wouldn't stop ringing. It had been 3 days since the grocery store incident, and the pressure was building from all sides. The video of Rita being forced to the ground had now been viewed over 2 million times. News trucks were parked outside the police station, and reporters were asking tough questions that Captain Miller wasn't sure how to answer. Captain Miller had been running the Internal Affairs Department for 12 years. He had seen plenty of cases where officers made mistakes, but this one felt different. The video evidence was crystal clear, and the public outrage was unlike anything he had experienced before. He knew that a thorough investigation was the only way forward, even if it meant discovering uncomfortable truths about his own department. The first step was reviewing all the footage. Captain Miller sat in his office with Detective Angela Torres, going through every second of video from multiple angles. The store's security cameras had captured everything in sharp detail. They watched Bradley draw his weapon on a woman who was simply shopping for groceries. They saw Rita's calm compliance and her attempts to show her military identification. There was no question about what had happened. "This is bad, Captain," Detective Torres said quietly. She had been working internal affairs for 8 years and had investigated hundreds of complaints. "I've never seen anything this clear-cut. There's no way to defend what Bradley did here." But the video was just the beginning. Captain Miller assigned Detective Torres to dig deeper into Bradley's service record. What they found made both of them feel sick to their stomachs. Over his 15-year career, Bradley had been involved in 17 complaints involving people of color. Most of these complaints had been dismissed or resulted in minor disciplinary action. Detective Torres spread the files across the conference room table. There was Kevin Washington, a black college student who complained that Bradley had stopped him for walking suspiciously near campus. There was Rosa Martinez, a Latina mother who said Bradley had searched her car without cause during a routine traffic stop. There was David Kim, an Asian businessman who reported that Bradley had questioned his citizenship status during a minor fender bender. Each file told a similar story. Bradley would approach situations with certain people differently than he would with others. He would be more aggressive, more suspicious, more likely to escalate minor encounters into major confrontations. The pattern was undeniable, yet somehow it had been overlooked for years. "How did this go on for so long?" Detective Torres asked. Captain Miller. The captain didn't have a good answer. The truth was that complaints against officers were often dismissed as misunderstandings or he said, she said situations. Without video evidence, it was easy to give officers the benefit of the doubt. Meanwhile, Rita was struggling with her own battle. The military had offered her counseling services, but she found it hard to talk about what had happened. She had always been strong and self-reliant, and admitting that the incident had affected her deeply felt like a sign of weakness. But her sister convinced her to speak with someone. Dr. Patricia Reeves was a counselor who specialized in helping people deal with trauma. When Rita first walked into her office, she could see the tension in her shoulders and the way she constantly checked the exits. These were signs of someone who no longer felt safe in the world. "I keep thinking about what could have happened," Rita told Dr. Reeves during their second session. "What if his finger had slipped? What if someone in the crowd had made a sudden movement? I could have died buying pasta." Dr. Reeves listened carefully and helped Rita understand that her feelings were completely normal for someone who had experienced what she had been through. The community response was growing stronger every day. Pastor William Johnson of the First Baptist Church organized a peaceful protest outside the police station. Over 300 people showed up, carrying signs that read, "Justice for Rita," and "Accountability Now." The crowd was diverse, including veterans, families, college students, and elderly residents who had never protested anything in their lives. Among the protesters was Patricia Collins, a 68-year-old grandmother whose own son had been stopped by Bradley years earlier. She had filed a complaint at the time, but nothing had come of it. Now, seeing Rita's video, she felt vindicated and angry that the pattern had been allowed to continue. "My boy was just walking home from work," Patricia told a reporter from Channel 7 News. "Officer Hoffman stopped him and treated him like a criminal for no reason. I complained, but they told me it was just a misunderstanding. Now look what happened to this poor woman." The media attention was intense. National news networks picked up the story, and Rita found herself at the center of a much larger conversation about police conduct and racial bias. She hadn't asked to become a symbol, but that's what was happening, whether she wanted it or not. Channel 12's investigative reporter Michael Torres had been digging into the story for a week. He requested Bradley's personnel file through the Freedom of Information Act and was shocked by what he found. In addition to the complaints, there were several commendations and positive reviews from supervisors. It painted a picture of a department that either couldn't see the pattern or chose to ignore it. The police union initially stood behind Bradley. Union representative Janet Phillips held a press conference defending him, saying that officers had to make split-second decisions in dangerous situations. But even she seemed uncomfortable as she spoke, especially when reporters asked her about the clear video evidence showing that Rita had posed no threat whatsoever. Public pressure continued to mount. The mayor, Donald Peterson, found himself in a difficult position. He needed to support his police department, but he also couldn't ignore the overwhelming evidence of misconduct. Local businesses were calling his office, worried about the negative attention the city was receiving. Tourism was down, and several planned events were being canceled. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Detective Torres interviewed Tom Henderson, the store manager. Tom had been carrying guilt about his role in starting the whole incident, and he was eager to cooperate fully. He provided additional security footage that showed the moments before Rita entered the store, proving that she had done absolutely nothing suspicious. More importantly, Tom revealed that Mrs. Patterson, the customer who had initially complained about Rita, had called him the day after the incident. She was devastated by what had happened and admitted that she couldn't explain why she had felt suspicious of Rita in the first place. "She seemed like a nice lady," Mrs. Patterson had told Tom. "I don't know what got into me." Rita's formal interview with Internal Affairs lasted 4 hours. She sat across from Captain Miller and Detective Torres in a small conference room, recounting every detail of that afternoon. Her voice remained steady, but her hands shook slightly as she described the moment Bradley drew his weapon. "I've faced enemy fire in 2 different countries," Rita told them. "I've been in situations where people were actually trying to kill me, but I've never felt as helpless as I did lying on that grocery store floor. In war, at least I understood why I was in danger. Here, I was just trying to buy food." Captain Miller found himself becoming angry as he listened to Rita's testimony. This was a decorated military officer who had served her country with honor, and she had been humiliated by one of his officers for no reason other than prejudice and poor judgment. The investigation was revealing uncomfortable truths about the department, but Captain Miller knew that the only way forward was through complete transparency and accountability. The people of Millbrook deserved better, and Rita deserved justice. Police Chief Raymond Thompson sat in his office staring at the thick file on his desk. After 28 years in law enforcement, he thought he had seen everything. But this case was different. The evidence was overwhelming. The public pressure was intense, and he knew that whatever decision he made would change his department forever. Chief Thompson had always prided himself on running a clean department. He had worked hard to build trust with the community, and in just a few minutes, one officer's actions had undone years of progress. The phone calls from angry citizens hadn't stopped for 2 weeks. The mayor was breathing down his neck, and the national media was painting his entire department as corrupt. The Internal Affairs report lay open in front of him. 17 complaints against Officer Bradley Hoffman over 15 years. 17 times when citizens had tried to tell them there was a problem, and 17 times when the system had failed to listen. Chief Thompson felt personally responsible for every single one of those missed opportunities. At 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, Chief Thompson called a press conference. The room was packed with reporters, community leaders, and concerned citizens. Rita sat in the front row with her lawyer, watching the man who would decide her officer's fate. She had been dreading this moment, worried that the department would find a way to protect Bradley despite the clear evidence. After a thorough investigation, Chief Thompson began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. I am announcing that Officer Bradley Hoffman has been suspended from the Millbrook Police Department without pay, effective immediately. The investigation has revealed a pattern of misconduct that cannot be tolerated in this department. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, community members applauded, and Rita felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't complete justice yet, but it was a start, Chief Thompson continued. Furthermore, I am recommending that criminal charges be filed against Officer Hoffman for his actions at Westfield Supermarket. District Attorney Linda Shaw had been watching the case closely. She had been a prosecutor for 15 years and had always worked to maintain good relationships with local police departments. But when she watched the video of Rita being forced to the ground, she knew that some things were more important than politics. The next morning, DA Shaw held her own press conference. Standing behind a podium in the courthouse, she announced that her office would be filing federal civil rights violation charges against Bradley. No one is above the law, she said firmly. When a police officer abuses their power and violates someone's constitutional rights, they must be held accountable. The charges carried serious penalties. If convicted, Bradley could face up to 10 years in prison and would be permanently banned from working in law enforcement anywhere in the country. The announcement sent shockwaves through the police community, where officers rarely faced serious criminal charges for on-duty conduct. The police union's response was swift and predictable. Union President Frank Rodriguez initially announced that they would fight the charges and support Bradley through the legal process. Officers make difficult decisions every day, he told reporters. We cannot second-guess every action taken in the heat of the moment. But behind closed doors, even union leaders were struggling with this case. When they watched the video evidence, many of them couldn't understand Bradley's actions. Veteran officers who had served for decades said they had never seen anything like it. The union's legal team advised them that this case would be nearly impossible to defend. Rita was struggling with her newfound role as a public figure. She had always been a private person, comfortable leading soldiers but uncomfortable being the center of attention in civilian life. But as she watched the news coverage and read the stories of other people who had faced similar treatment, she realized that staying silent wasn't an option. Her first public speaking engagement was at the Millbrook Community Center. Over 400 people packed into the small auditorium to hear her speak. Rita stood at the podium in her dress uniform, her medals and ribbons telling the story of 2 decades of military service. I didn't choose to become the face of this issue, Rita began, her voice clear and strong. But when I see other people who have suffered in silence, I know I can't stay quiet. What happened to me was wrong, but it wasn't unique. We have a problem in our community and we need to fix it together. The audience listened in complete silence as Rita described not just what had happened to her, but how it felt to be treated like a criminal when she had spent her entire adult life serving her country. She talked about the importance of accountability and the need for police officers to serve all members of the community equally. Rita's speech was recorded and shared widely on social media. Within days, she was receiving invitations to speak at other communities facing similar problems. Civil rights organizations reached out, asking her to join their efforts to reform police practices. Military leaders called to offer their support. The most powerful moment came when other victims started coming forward. Kevin Washington, the college student who had been stopped by Bradley years earlier, contacted Rita through social media. I thought I was the only one, he wrote. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. One by one, more people reached out. There was Carlos Martinez, a construction worker who said Bradley had harassed him during a traffic stop. There was Jennifer Kim, a nurse who reported that Bradley had questioned her right to be in the hospital where she worked. Each story followed the same pattern of unnecessary aggression and discriminatory treatment. The most heartbreaking story came from Patricia Collins, the grandmother whose son had been stopped by Bradley. She arranged to meet Rita at a local coffee shop, where she shared photos of her son Antonio, who had died in a car accident 2 years after his encounter with Bradley. He was never the same after that day, Patricia said through tears. He started avoiding certain parts of town, always, looking over his shoulder. That officer stole my boy's sense of safety. Rita listened to each story with growing anger and determination. These weren't just statistics or case files. These were real people whose lives had been affected by one officer's prejudice and the department's failure to address it. She realized that her fight wasn't just about her own experience anymore. Local businesses started taking sides. Some shop owners put up signs supporting Rita and calling for police reform. Others worried that criticizing the police would hurt their businesses. The town was becoming divided in ways that went beyond the original incident. At the high school, teachers were struggling with how to discuss the situation with their students. Many young people had seen the video and were asking difficult questions about justice and equality. Some students organized their own peaceful protests, walking out of classes to show support for Rita and demand change. Bradley, meanwhile, had hired an expensive lawyer and was preparing to fight the charges. He maintained his innocence, claiming that he had been following proper procedures and that the incident was being blown out of proportion. His lawyer suggested that Rita had somehow provoked the confrontation, despite the clear video evidence showing otherwise. The legal proceedings were just beginning, but the community had already started to change. People were having conversations about race and justice that many had avoided for years. The incident had forced Millbrook to confront uncomfortable truths about itself and its institutions. Rita continued her military duties while also becoming an advocate for change. She testified before the city council about the need for better police training and oversight. She met with the police chief to discuss reforms. She spoke at churches, schools, and community centers, sharing her story and calling for justice. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but Rita had found her voice and her purpose. She was determined to make sure that what happened to her would never happen to anyone else. 6 months after that terrible day at Westfield Supermarket, the federal courthouse in downtown Millbrook was packed with people waiting to hear Bradley Hoffman's fate. Rita sat in the front row wearing her dress military uniform, flanked by her lawyer and her sister. Behind her, the courtroom was filled with other victims who had found the courage to come forward, community leaders, and reporters from across the country. Judge Margaret Foster had been on the federal bench for 20 years. She had seen plenty of cases involving police misconduct, but the evidence in this one was particularly disturbing. The video footage left no room for doubt about what had happened, and the pattern of behavior revealed during the investigation painted a picture of an officer who had consistently abused his power. Bradley's lawyer had tried every possible defense. He claimed his client was following procedure, that he had feared for his safety, that the situation had been misunderstood. But none of these arguments held up against the crystal-clear video evidence and the testimony of multiple witnesses. Even Bradley's own fellow officers had testified that his actions were unjustifiable. When Judge Foster finally spoke, her words carried the weight of justice that the community had been waiting for. "Officer Hoffman," she said, looking directly at Bradley, "you took an oath to protect and serve all citizens equally. Instead, you used your position of authority to intimidate and humiliate an innocent person based on nothing more than your own prejudices." The sentence was harsh but fair. Bradley received 4 years in federal prison for violating Rita's civil rights, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Most importantly, he was permanently banned from working in law enforcement anywhere in the United States. His career as a police officer was over forever. Rita felt a mixture of relief and sadness as she listened to the sentence. Justice had been served, but she couldn't help thinking about all the people who had suffered because the system had failed to stop Bradley earlier. Still, she hoped that this outcome would send a clear message that police officers who abused their power would face real consequences. The criminal case was just one part of Rita's fight for justice. Her civil lawsuit against the city of Millbrook had been working its way through the courts for months. Her lawyer, David Chen, had built a strong case showing not just Bradley's individual misconduct, but the department's failure to address his pattern of behavior over 15 years. The city's legal team had initially tried to fight the lawsuit, arguing that Bradley's actions were his own and didn't represent department policy. But as more evidence came to light about the ignored complaints and missed warning signs, their position became impossible to defend. Mayor Peterson and the city council realized that a long, expensive trial would only bring more negative attention to their community. The settlement negotiations took place in a conference room at City Hall. Rita sat across from the mayor, the police chief, and their lawyers. She wasn't just seeking money for herself. She wanted to make sure that real changes would happen to prevent future incidents. "This isn't about punishing the entire police department," Rita told them. "It's about making sure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else. We need real reform, not just words." The final settlement was substantial, $2.8 million paid to Rita by the city. But more importantly, the agreement included detailed requirements for police reform. The city committed to implementing new training programs focused on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques. They agreed to create an independent oversight board with real power to investigate complaints. They promised to review and revise their hiring and promotion practices. Rita decided to donate half of her settlement money to establish the Millbrook Community Justice Fund. The fund would provide legal assistance to people who couldn't afford lawyers when filing complaints against police officers. It would also support programs that brought police officers and community members together for dialogue and understanding. Chief Thompson, who had initially been devastated by the scandal in his department, became one of the strongest advocates for reform. He worked closely with Rita to design new training programs that would help officers recognize and overcome their own biases. "We can't change the past," he told his officers during a department meeting, "but we can make sure we do better in the future." The changes in the police department were dramatic. Every officer was required to complete 40 hours of bias recognition training. New recruits went through extensive psychological screening. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers, with strict penalties for anyone who turned them off inappropriately. The department also created a new position, Community Liaison Officer, whose job was to build bridges between police and residents. Officer Lisa Chen, the sergeant who had arrived at the supermarket that day and immediately recognized the problem, was promoted to lead the new Community Relations Division. She had been horrified by Bradley's actions and was determined to rebuild trust between the police and the people they served. The changes extended far beyond the police department. Westfield Supermarket, where it all began, became a symbol of transformation. Store manager Tom Henderson, who still felt guilty about making that initial phone call, worked with Rita to create a community dialogue program. Once a month, the store's conference room hosted meetings where police officers and residents could talk openly about their concerns and experiences. The first dialogue session was awkward and tense, but as months went by, real relationships began to form. Officers learned about the daily fears that many residents lived with, while community members gained insight into the challenges that police officers faced. It wasn't always comfortable, but it was honest and necessary. Rita's role as an advocate grew beyond Millbrook. She received invitations to speak at conferences across the country, sharing her story and the lessons learned from her community's transformation. She testified before Congress about the need for national police reform legislation. Military leaders asked her to help train soldiers who would work with civilian law enforcement after their service. But Rita's most meaningful work happened in small moments. She visited schools to talk with young people about justice and equality. She met with other victims of police misconduct, offering support and encouragement. She worked with police academies to help train the next generation of officers to be better than the last. 1 year after the incident, Rita returned to Westfield Supermarket for the first time since that terrible day. She had avoided the store for months, unable to face the memories. But Tom Henderson had personally invited her to attend the store's first annual Community Unity Day, an event created to celebrate the positive changes that had emerged from such a dark moment. As Rita walked through the doors, she felt her heart racing. But instead of fear, she felt hope. The store was filled with families, police officers, community leaders, and ordinary citizens all coming together. Children were playing games while their parents talked with police officers. Local organizations had set up booths to share information about their work. Chief Thompson approached Rita with a smile. "Colonel, thank you for everything you've done for our community," he said. "I know this journey started with something terrible, but look what we've built together." Rita looked around the store and saw something beautiful. She saw a community that had faced its problems honestly and worked to fix them. She saw police officers who were committed to serving everyone,